Hi Founder fans, Jason here, and today's founder is William Washington, the only member of the Washington family to significantly contribute to the Revolutionary War, other than, George. Now, William Washington was George Washington's second cousin, and he was only 23 years old when the war broke out, but he joins the fight anyway. It helps when your cousin's in charge. Anyway, William Washington, ends up proving himself on the battlefield. Very early on, he's elected as a captain, just 23 years old, and he chooses a 17-year-old to be his second in command. It just so happens that 17-year-old is a young James Monroe. Neither of them knew that he would be the fifth president one day. Either way, Monroe hops on board, and they serve valiantly. Famously, in the Battle of Trenton, there's not a lot of injuries. The Continental Army wins that pretty quickly, but both William and James Monroe were significantly wounded in that engagement. Now, after recovery, William does rejoin the army. He ends up getting promoted in rank pretty constantly, and in fact, pretty much as soon as he's healed, he's sent down to the Southern Department. He's promoted to a colonel and put in charge of the 4th Continental Light Dragoons. Now, just to clarify, dragoons are kind of like cavalry, that they ride around on horseback, but when they get to a fight, as opposed to a cavalry who fights on horse, generally the dragoons would dismount and then fight on foot from there. Now, he's participates in most of the important battles in the Southern Department through the second half of the war. He becomes a favorite of Daniel Morgan, who puts him in charge of several things, one of which is the Battle of Rugeley's Mill. Now, what's fascinating about Rugeley's Mill is William Washington deploys the first known use of a Quaker gun. Now, a Quaker gun is a log that you paint black and keep at a distance so the enemy thinks it's a cannon. That's why I say gun in quotes. Now, this is probably not the first time someone's performed this trick throughout history. It's just one of the first times we actually hear about it being documented. It also becomes a very commonplace tool during the Civil War, probably because rumors of Washington's success with it. Now, they surround a house full of British soldiers and officers, and they say, hey, we got a cannon out here. I'm going to count to 3 and then fire. You better come out. And it worked. It tricked the British inside. Now, I do want to note the term Quaker gun might be deemed offensive because Quakers are famously pacifists. So a Quaker gun, I would assume, is a gun that doesn't kill anyone. Either way, it does work. Now, he ends up going on to later serve in the Battle of Cowpens, another famous battle, but in that battle, William Washington meets up with Banastre Tarleton, one of the most famous and feared officers of the British Army in North America at the time. Interestingly, at one point, William Washington actually fights Banastre Tarleton hand to hand. Unfortunately, William is again injured. The bullet only grazes his leg, but he is injured. And then Tarleton flees. William Washington chases him on foot for several miles before eventually giving up because Tarleton did get away. Now, if you thought that the second time was enough, William Washington gets wounded during battle a third time. His last engagement is the Battle of Eutaw Springs, one of the late engagements in the Revolutionary War. In this, he's in thick brush, and his horse is shot out from under him, and they fall over, and the horse lands on William and traps him. The British come over, and they end up bayoneting him a few times, but Washington survives, now with hurt leg from the horse and bayonet wounds, in addition to his previous several times getting shot. He is then taken as a prisoner. Fortunately for Washington, this is about a month before the victory at Yorktown. And after that, many soldiers on both sides are just kind of let go. And Washington is one of these people. After all, he is a cousin. He shares a last name with the victorious general in the war. You're not going to commit any crimes against him. So they send him back. And after the war, Washington becomes pretty successful. He ends up moving to South Carolina. He was originally from Virginia, as the Washingtons are wont to do. And William Washington moves to South Carolina, becomes very popular there. He ends up serving in the state assembly on several occasions. When John Adams is president and the quasi-war with France breaks out, Adams calls in George Washington to take back over the American army temporarily. And while Hamilton essentially really did the running of that army that never really had to do any fighting, William Washington served as an aide on his cousin George's staff. So really the highest promotion he is given, theoretically, he is given a brevet promotion at the end of the Revolutionary War to brigadier general. So he ends up ending the war as a general. But really the highest thing is when he's serving on the staff of George Washington in the late 1790s. Lastly, what's interesting about William Washington, he's actually floated and recommended to become governor of South Carolina, but he actually turns that office down. He doesn't even run for it. He says, no, don't nominate me, because he was under the impression that the governor of South Carolina and the governor of any state should be born in the state they are running. He was happy to serve in the state assembly. He was a resident and considered himself a South Carolinian, but since he was not born there, he did not think it's his place to become governor. So that's a brief overview of the life of William Washington, the only other Washington to have a real important impact on the Revolutionary War. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do me a favor and hit like, because the algorithm will tell more people about the channel, and they can learn about the American Revolution with us. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe. I put out videos about the American Revolution 7 days a week. I will be back with another founder for you tomorrow.